Make sure my elbows don't go out.
Okay, if we go live.
Good, guys.
Okay. We talked yesterday a little bit about the organic dairy relief grants last year and how there was basically a shortfall at the end of that grant program period, and some applicants who qualified but weren't able to receive a grant because the funding had run out. So that's a question I know we all have and are hoping that the agency can help us answer to. Plus, to better understand how the program went, if we haven't had a chance to hear about that. So we've invited E.B. Flory to join us this morning. Good morning.
Thank you for having me. And for the record, E.B. Flory with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and I am our Food Safety and Consumer Protection Division Director. And I was involved with the organic grant program from start to finish. So just a summary of the program: there were 129 eligible farms during the grant program period, and 127 of those 129 applied. And of the two that did not apply, we reached out to them on numerous occasions to make sure they were aware of it and other things, and they elected to not apply. So they were informed, they had their reasons for not applying. And of the 127 that applied, 123 received payment. And so where we fell short on that $6.9 million grant, there were 4 that did not receive payment, totaling $125,492.80. So just under $126,000. We spent a lot of time at the agency. This was an estimated number on pounds that we from different milk shippers to come up with the dollar amount as you all were deciding what it should be. We went through a lengthy process to see where the estimate fell short. And some of our organic producers that ship to one business to process it are a member of another cooperative. And what we found was that the cooperative thought the milk purchaser provided the pounds for that farm, when in fact they didn't. And so for us, that's a learning lesson and a bit of a confusing point. You know, you belong to this co-op, but this other entity actually is buying your milk. And so if we ever have a program again like this in the future, that's something that we will nail down. When we were asking for the pounds numbers from the different milk buyers, they did not want to provide by each farm, identifying them. So they sent summaries. So we weren't able to identify and say yes, we have pounds for every single farm. It was just a lump sum total because that information for the farmers is proprietary, and same for those businesses. So we were close to having the right dollar amount overall, but that's where we feel we came short on those estimated numbers. So.
Can you talk a little bit about, just to help us remember, and maybe if there was details that were added that the agency worked on, maybe after it left our committee anyway, what were the eligibility criteria? So the 129 that you identified as eligible. Help us think about it as who might not have been eligible.
Okay.
The guy in the street might have said, take that.
Yep. So the first part of eligibility was that they had to ship organic milk in 2023, and they still had to be actively shipping. That did not mean that they still had to be organic. We did have a few organic farms that switched to conventional, but because they were shipping as organic during the time period the legislature specified and were still shipping milk, they are eligible to apply. The main criteria was that they, other than being an active producer in 2023, was also that they are still actively shipping through the entire grant process. So through application, our agency processing things, and then actual payment. And Steve, am I missing any other criteria?
No, if I may just clarify, it was 2022.
2022, yes.
That they had to be producing organic milk, and then they had to be currently operating, producing milk at the time.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Sorry about that. So,
Question, yeah, John.
It's just cow dairy, not goats.
anyone, well, no, it was, I believe you all specified cow dairy. Hmm,
No, it was organic. I think it was just organic. I have the language right here.
Did any goat dairy get grants?
I don't think that we had any apply. We did have, organic farmstead operations, which is where they have a farm milking their own animals and then making it into a value-added product. And so we did have those businesses also, apply, and not just people shipping, to buyers to process it for them.
Could you let us know what where those four farms are?
Not off the top of my head, but I
Right,
can get that
maybe
back to you all.
that-
Yep,
that-
that's not an issue.
Representative Rice?
Can you just clarify, so there have been two numbers testified to about around 126 and 252.
Yep.
Can you just clarify?
Yep, the approximate 126 number is based on those farms that still meet the eligibility requirements that was put into the law, so still actively shipping. So when we were asked last week by Senate Ag, we didn't have a confirmed number yet. And so I think that's where the confusion has been. We went back and checked. And so for the four that did not receive payment, they are still actively shipping and meeting the criteria of the grant program, which was when you apply and through the process and payment, you're still shipping.
Just, there was a pretty specific number cited in Senate Ag, I think. So can you just talk a little bit more about what the process was from last week to this week and identifying?
The process was just verifying of who did not receive payment, who was still active. And so that's what we were verifying. We did have one business get a partial payment, but they're no longer actively shipping.
So that is not one of the four farms that we're talking about.
No.
Received a partial grant payment?
They received like the ending amount until we ran out of the dollars, and they're no longer shipping. And so they're not included in the four that we have with the 126 number because they're not meeting as the law was written by you all in the legislature.
Because they're still not shipping even as we're
Correct.
discussing this, and that would, the way the statute was written anyway, they would not be eligible for more.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it. Representative Levitt?
To Mike's question, so walk me through this. Four farms were eligible, but they didn't get the 126,000 that they could have gotten because you ran out of money.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
And they're still actively shipping milk.
So how are they surviving? They just are.
They would like this funding, absolutely.
So 126,000 would make that whole.
For these four farms.
Okay.
And the 126 is an approximate number. It's just over 125, but I can email you so you have to the penny dollar amount.
Representative Templin, did you have a question?
Do we have a sense of how many people didn't make the cut because they were no longer in operation, but were at the front end asking for money?
By asking for money, do you mean like they wanted to apply or?
Yeah, so I mean, when this problem first occurred with the spike in organic feed, there were, a number of people affected. Maybe not all of them made it through to the point of receiving money because they were no longer in operation. Do we know how many farms that was?
I don't off the top of my head. Prior to this grant program at the agency, we weren't specifically tracking organic dairy farms. We were just tracking dairy farms. And so through part of this process, we now are able to track that within our records. And so like we can pull out fairly quickly a running total of how many organic dairies we have. But prior to that, we didn't have it. And so it would be comparing some records with like NOFA, which when we got their information, not all of it necessarily matched what our records were, just in some different, they have some farms that were outside of Vermont, but might have Vermont farmland that were certified by them and things like that. So we did spend a tremendous amount of time initially establishing how many farms are there and things like
What
that.
constitutes a farm even? Okay.
So,
We have Maddie Kempner from NOFA who will testify next and may be able to answer, more, give you more information on that, Dave. I was wondering also, because we've heard things that may be true or may not be true. And maybe if you have any insight into this, whether there were farms that ended up applying and you determined they were eligible and received a grant, who initially weren't counted when that year, back in the spring, when the $6.9 million figure was calculated, which again was not part of the work that we did in our committee. So, I think it's a bit of a black box to us, some of us anyway.
yep. I think through the process, there were 2 to 3 businesses that we hadn't originally identified. And part of that was that they may have had 2 farms, but were listed under one entity. And in my realm, each farm, like where there's a bulk tank, that is one farm. So even if it's owned by the same person, whether they seasonally are at 2 different places or they're split between 2 different places. And so that was some of the discrepancy we had between how NOFA tracks data and how we do. And so as those came along, we verified that, yes, these are legitimately organic and they're operating and allowed them to apply. So,
And we'll see other questions. Yeah.
Was it just bad luck that these 4 farms ended up at the tail, or was it first come, first serve?
it was first come, first serve, and we didn't know when it started if it would be enough money or not. We thought that it would be ample, and we were very close to being spot on. I know for the farms waiting for these funds, they would feel differently about my statement because they've not gotten payment. I understand that they need that. But losing my train of thought. What was the rest of your question? I apologize.
Well, you answered as far as first come, first
Yeah.
serve, so that these 4 farms were really the last
Yes.
processed by the agency.
They were. So it was based on when their full application was submitted, which involved multiple things, not just the online application, but also their documentation of pounds. And so when all of their information was submitted, we could then process it. So these were people that were late in the game applying.
Thank you for all that. Anything that might just be helpful for us to know, sort of reflections on the application process, whether it sounds like nearly everybody who was eligible applied and you made every effort to make sure that the other 2 could apply if they wanted to. So it was something they were all able to do despite everything else they were trying to do for the summer.
From an agency standpoint in our implementation of it, things went overall very smoothly. When this program rolled out, it was also the same week the flood happened. So it was a very heavy lift by a few individuals in the agency, a group of us, and we worked a lot of extra hours to try to get this done and be as timely as we could because we knew these payments were needed. Having more support when we get these grants for the agency to implement it. We want to serve our farmers. We want to help the farming community as much as possible, but it's becoming more and more of a struggle for us to balance the job that we have to do every day with this very important work and not having any way to, whether it's like a temporary employee or anything, to just help with some of the logistics of getting it done. There's a very dedicated staff of the agency, and we wanted to move as quick as we could for these producers that needed this support. So.
Representative Rice.
I just wanted to reflect for a second on something that you just said, which is that the farms that didn't get the funding were late to the game and applying, which I just don't think is, this wasn't sort of put out as a competitive grant process or something. The idea, and I'm not pointing fingers or saying, but I'm just saying this was, the communication around this was that these funds were there for the farms that met the criteria. So I don't, if a farm came in toward the end of the window that the application period was open for, or toward the beginning, shouldn't necessarily reflect on the.
We put on our website and in the application process and other things that it was until the funds were exhausted. As we started seeing things were tighter and we had seen a large number of people apply, we were directly reaching out to these farms and telling them, like, if you're going to apply, like, you need to, like, things are getting tight. I feel badly that these farms were not funded. It's just that funds were exhausted and they were late, like down to the last week to apply. And some of them just thought like the money would be there and we were trying to communicate. This was an estimated number and we didn't know if we would run out of funds or not. And unfortunately we did. These 4 farms, I've had communication with many of them and they greatly want this funding and I understand that. They still have bills that they're paying and trying to make up for this hard time. And it's unfortunate that the estimated amount wasn't enough. And so I understand them being upset and wanting this funding. So, they still qualify for it. I would definitely support these 4 farms getting that funding. And that's been hard on them, but they're still shipping and hoping that things can be amended with your efforts to get them that payment.
Right, and as we all know, if there's good news, it's that we have the budget adjustment process and an opportunity to, for our committee anyway, to recommend to our House Appropriation Committee that we include this money in that bill. And the agency would support that?
Yes, we have been in communication, passed along this number to finance. And we've not heard from higher up in the administration, their take on it, to have it be put in the Budget Adjustment Act. And I don't know if you have an update on that, Steve, or not.
May I answer? Steve Collier. So we made the administration is aware of the issue. They are still balancing all of their multiple priorities and trying to determine what they can support and what they can't. We don't have that answer yet. So the agency is obviously very sympathetic to what happened to the farms. We obviously expected for them all to be paid. That was the intent of the program. We very much regret that anyone was left out of it. Whether or not we can come up with additional funds will be a decision that all of you make with the administration's input. But we just don't have a definitive word on our end yet whether we can support it.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Evie, if you want, you can, if you're able to stay and you don't need to stay in that seat. If you want to move to the side, we may call you back again if other questions come up, but why don't we turn it over to Maddie Kempner. If there's something that you wanted to add, Maddie, I'm not sure that you've got new testimony, but let us hear it.
I do, and thank you for having me, Maddie Kempner, NOFA, Vermont, for the record. I just want to start by expressing once again, I think I said this yesterday, but my gratitude to all of you on this committee for supporting these relief funds last session. It really made a huge difference for so many of our producers, and we have heard from them directly that they really want NOFA and they want us to find ways to help them express their gratitude to you all. So in lieu of direct testimonials at this point, I just want to share that with you, that there's a lot of gratitude out there for these funds. I also really want to express my gratitude and our gratitude at NOFA for the work of the agency. I want to reiterate the point that Evie made around the need for supplemental staffing when grants like this, when emergency grants come up. This is actually a conversation we've been having internally here at NOFA just this morning, given the pressure that was put on our staff here at NOFA around the Farmer Emergency Fund. It's a lot on any organization and any staff to have something like this that they weren't anticipating and didn't necessarily have the capacity ready for. So I also want to support that point of Evie. I also would love to urge this committee to include the higher number that you heard, the $252,203 in your BAA memo. Our understanding, and I think this is what Evie just shared too, that the fifth farmer in this example did receive a partial payment already under the funding. And we really want to see that farm also get their full payment. It doesn't necessarily square to us that if they were eligible for a partial payment, that they shouldn't be eligible for the full payment. I don't think there's any examples of any other farm that received a percentage of what they were eligible for. So we're really hoping that the committee will support the full amount of $252,203. Our understanding too is that had the agency not run out of funds, that this fifth farmer would have had their application fully funded. So would like to see that come to fruition, since it was really essentially a miscalculation on the agency's part, that we came away with fewer funds than we thought we were going to, or that the demand, was higher than we thought it was going to be. And I also just want to highlight that although that farm may not be eligible currently because they are no longer shipping, there are other farms who have stopped shipping since they received this grant funding. Not that it was necessarily their intent to do so, but we're now several months out from the original grant application deadline. And so there are other farms who are in this same scenario where they have already received their full payment, but would not necessarily be eligible were they to receive funding through the BAA, for example. So I just want to lift that up. And I think that's all I have to say. But I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, in addition to what Evie and Steve shared.
Representative Templeman.
Just to redirect my earlier question to you, Maddie, concerning how many farms were practicing but were not eligible for payment because they went out of business before that date commenced.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would also have to circle back with you on that to give you a concrete number. I know there were several that went out of business that stopped shipping early in the year last year, prior to this money even being allocated. So I don't know if you're interested in understanding, how many went out throughout the course of the year, maybe before and after this funding was passed into law. I think the other factor at play here in our minds around this additional farm is that had they been able to count on a full payment through this program, had they known that they were going to receive a full payment from this program, they may have made a different decision and they may still be shipping. But since they only received, I think it was 10% of what they were eligible or what they thought they would be eligible to receive, that may also have factored into their decision. It's for a lot of these farms, it's not a small amount of money that they were receiving. And an amount that actually could impact their decision whether to keep cows on and milking or not.
I think, just going on memory, a year ago when we first heard about this problem, and then over the course of the next few weeks, we were talking about 140-ish numbers. So that ballpark. So now
27.
9 eligible. Yeah. So
11.
In that
plus.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, I think just to sort of dial in on what Rep. Templeman is asking for, I think it would be helpful for us sort of as we debrief from this process, when we came into this last year, we were talking about this as an emergency need. And we were trying to figure out how to get these funds to these farms as quickly as possible because we were seeing, day by day farms sell their herd and stop shipping. So I think just sort of zooming out, it would be helpful to understand how did this process work? We learned about an emergency. How long did it take us, between the legislature and the agency to decide to move on these funds, to decide how much was necessary to get them out the door, and what did that look like on the ground, and how many farms didn't make it, and would there be a system by which more farms would have made it if we were able to act?
And recall that when we made a recommendation a year ago through the budget adjustment process of 2023, it was a number 9 million.
9.2.
9.2 million, yeah. So that was partly, I mean, different partly being the fact that there were more farms at the time who were, at least in the initial estimate, eligible for that. And Maddie, when you talk about shipping, and I think maybe when we were talking earlier about the number that were shipping and are not now shipping, do you know what that number is? So so farms that were eligible got a grant. In addition to this one that was on the cusp, how many others do you know of that are not shipping?
I think it's very few. I want to say it's in the realm of 2 or 3. I can definitely circle back with folks who work more directly with those farms. I think it's in that realm though, a fairly small number. So, and that's not to say that I think there were folks who, purposefully took advantage of this funding and, and stayed in so that they could get the funding and then got out. But I do think there were some business scenarios where it was not likely that they were going to be able to stay in, and they had gotten to a point maybe where that was just outside of their control after a point, and that these funds still, in those cases, I will say also did to a large extent what they were intended to do, which is to say it helped these farms pay their debts. It circulated to other local businesses in the economy, whom those farms owed money. So I think there were still a lot of really important needs met through those funds. But yeah, there were a few that have stopped shipping since they got the grant.
Representative Lipsky.
I'm trying to go back a year, but I recall testimony early of January 2023 that this 2022 year, when it began, there were, take a remembered number of about 159 operating or organic dairy producers. And at the end of that year, they were down to 137. And then since we started debating it, it had dropped about 10 or 11, which brought it into the 129 range. Is that at all accurate? I mean, that's why we were referred to this as an emergency. There's a lot of testimony of the depth of carnage and attrition. I just would like to confirm that how serious the attrition was in 2022.
There was, your recollection is correct, Representative Lipsky. There was a precipitous decline at the beginning, and particularly in the first quarter to the first half of 2023. I'm looking at our 2022 statistics through Vermont Organic Farmers, and at the end of 2022, we had 141 certified organic dairies. And so for the number to have gone from 141 at the end of 2022 to, I believe it ended up being 128 farms that were initially eligible for this grant, that is a drop of 13 farms. I don't have final statistics yet for 2023. Those usually get finalized within the first few weeks of the year. So I can circle back with you and let you know what our official numbers are now. But that recollection that you just stated is correct. And I think it's also really, I just want to reiterate that these were farms of all sizes and lots of different business models who equally needed these funds. There are examples of farms in organic dairy that are really held up as a standard and, who are championed in terms of their viability and their business savvy and their management skills. And many farms in that category still really, really needed these funds and benefited and were able to stay in business because of them.
Other questions?
I have a question for either of you or Steve.
Okay.
When it's appropriate.
Maddie, thank you. And thank you for starting your testimony by highlighting the efforts that agency and that your organization put into making this happen in difficult circumstances. don't want to lose sight of that fact that it was a program that I think we all agreed was needed, and folks had to step up to make it happen. We'll try and see if we can figure out this little glitch that came up at the end. Who would you like to ask us to?
I guess you tell me. I'm just trying to, in light of sort of Maddie's testimony about the 125 versus 252 and the partial payment, just hoping to understand that a little bit better.
Sure, I can try to field it. Sure, thank you. Sure. Hi, everyone. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So, I mean, it's pretty simple. The farm was technically eligible when they applied, and now they're not producing milk. And so that was just a parameter that was built into the grant program. That's what's written in the law, is that in order to be eligible for the grant, you have to be producing milk. And so.
But the grant should have been paid out months ago. This is just to fix we're talking about this amount of money now to try to fix the fact that there wasn't enough money during the grant period.
I mean, should have been paid had there been enough money. And that was part of the grant agreement too. Everyone knew that the money was an estimate, which we hoped would be adequate, but it was an estimate. And right in the law, it said, run out of money, nobody else gets a grant. So yes, absolutely, they were technically eligible at the time, but it was our understanding that the whole point of this money, which was sort of unprecedented, and by the way, the farmers who receive these grants, as I understand it, were incredibly appreciative of all of your work. And they said that time and time again to our folks who are working on it. I do think it was very meaningful. We're very appreciative of NOFA's work with us in trying to help identify it. It's made our processes better, that we now have a better understanding of who's organic. We're always trying to we want farmers to all be treated the same. We don't want to differentiate between whether they're organic or conventional, but we appreciate all of their work that all of them do. And it was great to work with NOFA to further that partnership, to try to get the information that we needed. And ultimately, the number was incredibly close. Considering how we had to get the number, and we were paying by hundredweight. We thought we had an exact amount from the producers. It turned out that amount was missing information. We went to all the buyers and said, how much milk do you buy? Not only in general, but in 2022, because this was specifically based on 2022. So we thought we had an exact number. We actually thought we'd have surplus because we knew some farms that produced in 2022 had gone out of business. So we absolutely anticipated that there would be enough money. The agency, no one is suggesting that anybody is more worthy or eligible than anyone else. It's just what the law says is that we're producing milk. And we thought the intent was we wanted to keep farms producing milk, because all those farms who went out of business and are no longer producing milk didn't get a grant. I mean, the one there, I think it's about 15 or so, I don't know exactly, that went out of business who were producing in 2022 and could have been eligible if they kept producing. But that was that different judgment that could have been made, that you could have chosen to compensate farms that bore those 2022 expenses, but then went out of business. But I think the judgment was made not to try to compensate people who had losses, but try to keep people who were operating in business. So that, I mean.
So can I just one thought, just when you're using the word technically eligible, do you mean anything by that?
I do, but I'd rather not talk about it publicly, just because it's about a particular farm, and I'd rather not get into those details here. I could do it privately, but we're not here to make anyone look bad. So,
Okay, good. Why don't we see whether we can resolve that question offline? Just looking at the clock here, so largely, I think this is a policy question. Seems like the facts are fairly straightforward. One thing that, I just want to highlight and get your quick reaction, maybe, Steve, is we've used the word shipping, we've used the word producing, milking. I mean, I know there's a difference, right? And there are some farms that may be milking and selling the product as raw milk now who aren't counted in the shipping category. We're shipping in 2022, but aren't shipping any longer, but are still selling milk. Still operating as farms. So there's some nuances there, and clouds it a little bit perhaps.
Yes, that was a nuance that we had to navigate as we went, but in terms of what EB's presented to you, that's not a piece. Everybody, the way that we interpreted the program was that everyone who was producing organic milk in 2022 and was eligible for the program as long as they continued to produce milk, either organic or conventional, at the time of the grant. So the whether or not raw milk producers were not considered to be shipping milk, either organic or conventional, because producing milk within the dairy statutes has a meaning different than that. Raw milk has a place in the statutes, but it's not in that same bucket. And that was never contemplated as part of the producers that we were, all of the organic producers that we were trying to determine how much money to get, like none of them were selling raw milk. They were all shipping shipping organic milk to producers.
Okay, well,
On that note too, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is one of the bases for the organic, for paying organic farmers was two things, I think, was one is the feed prices were so exorbitantly high in 2022 because of the international market on feed. The other is that producers were locked into a price by contract. And one of the real benefits of selling raw milk is that you can set your own price. Not to say that consumers will pay whatever you want. So there's still restrictions, but the price isn't being set by you in a long-term contract like it is for organic producers, and conventional is a whole different world. But arguably, at least, I know that it's not like the market's inelastic, but arguably if you're a raw milk producer and your costs go up, you can charge more. Now, I know that's not true, but it's legally true. It may not play out that way if consumers won't pay the money.
thank you, Steve. Thank you all who testified on this morning on this question. I think maybe when we come back after lunch, we'll set aside a little time for the committee to share what our reactions are. But we'll let you all go for now.
Okay.
Chair Murphy, I
Yes.
just checked the numbers, and right now we have 123 organic dairies that are still shipping. 123 is like today's.
Okay.
The people.